Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So last lecture was about how the microstructure or the micro foundations make a big difference for Keynesian theory. Now, over the past few days I have been studying this, and in this lecture we will explain a little bit more about this concept, and in particular the effective demand. Remember that there is only one thing that we are trying to do, and that one thing is to explain unemployment. That if there is excess capacity lying idle in the factories and there are unemployed laborers and there is product which can be produced and it can be sold, then why is this situation true? And especially, you see, when things were just working perfectly just some time ago. So it is not that this is some dream situation where we are going to build some factory and hire some workers. The issue is how does it happen that without any... So there is a malfunction of the economic system. And if we had a command economy, we would say, okay, everybody, you hire the workers, you produce the goods, and we can force people to do that. So the theory, neoclassical theory, says that free markets work automatically to eliminate unemployment, and from appearances it seems like this should work. Yani, the laborers are trying to get jobs, the factory owners are trying to make profits. There's no question about that. I mean, we're not saying that people are not profit maximizing, people are not trying to... people do, and the factory owner is there to make money. So how come he's not hiring people? People are there to find jobs. How come they're not getting jobs? So this is the question that we're trying to answer. And neoclassical economic theory provides no answers to that. This is also one more important thing that Keynes realized. Now the other thing is that neoclassicals do not realize that. They think that people were on vacation. They didn't want to work, so that's why they didn't find jobs. But the truth is that that's not a viable explanation. So then there must be some other explanation. So now the question is, how do we explain something? This is very important. So according to, what is the meaning of explanation? So according to conventional methodology, if you can create a model of any kind and the model produces results which match the observations, then you have an explanation. Now this is based on the so-called empirical or positivist methodology, which says that what's inside the heart of a person does not matter, only the behavior which we can observe, the choices matter. So what is at the heart of the model can be a ridiculous model, but as long as it produces match to the observations, then you're good. Now we reject this methodology in this course, and we say this is not true. If the model doesn't make sense, then the model is wrong. The model should be plausible. It should have some resemblance to reality. It doesn't have to be a perfect match. You see, that's where they got the edge. I mean, no model will be a perfect match. That's guaranteed. But that doesn't mean that a model can... once you say that, okay, match is not possible, then it doesn't mean that we can make any kind of model we like. Yes, match is not possible, but we will consider the major features of the economy. We will hope that our model matches the big things, and we hope that ignoring the unimportant things will not cause any difficulties. So there's the basic theory. Alright, so now the Keynes has written some things about how wage bargain is conducted in terms of nominal wages, not real wages. The neoclassical theory then and neoclassical theory now continues to say that wage bargain is about real wages. But he says that no, wage bargain is in nominal wages, and he provides empirical evidence to show that. And he also says that the nominal wages do not control the real wages. Even if everybody is trying to cut the nominal wages, the prices will decline and real wage will remain the same. And that's exactly what the data shows. At the time that Keynes was writing, he didn't have the data, but after that people looked at this question and they came to the same conclusion, that nominal wages actually did go down, prices did go down, but they were roughly in proportion, and so the real wage remained constant. So basically this cannot be the solution, because if and we will see in a model that this doesn't work. So now, as we have studied in the last lecture, if you have Cobb-Douglas production function with constant returns to scale, the wage share is beta times the total revenue, or wage equals beta PQ, beta times the revenue divided by the quantity of labor. Basically think that the wage and the prices are fixed in the short run, which is true. The prices and wages are fixed in the short run. And if there is a sudden shock to the economy which reduces L, then what will happen is that the marginal product of labor will rise. It's obvious. You have a diminishing marginal product, so as labor reduces, MPL will increase. So then what will happen is that the MPL will be above the wage. So the marginal product. So what will happen as a result is that there will be higher demand for labor, and that higher demand of labor will push up the wages. But nothing like this was observed in the Great Depression. So the idea that we have a competitive market with Cobb-Douglas production and wages are being paid marginal product, this just doesn't match the data. So this theory doesn't seem to be relevant. In contrast with this, the Leontief model, which has constant marginal product and constant marginal costs, this produces results, as we have seen, in a model that does provide a better match to what we can see in the data. But the deep issue is that basically is the production function Cobb-Douglas or is it Leontief? These are micro details which are not considered by Keynes, but they make a big difference to what is being said. And so there can be, just to show, there are 4 microstructures, and these all lead to 4 different outcomes. So suppose that we have 50 landlords with 5 acres, 40 laborers, 10 units of corn is produced by 1 acre and 1 laborer. This is our basic simple model which we have been studying throughout. So what happens in this model? Suppose that we have money wage, and the standard setup which we used, that the laborers are paid wage, which is fixed by the market, that landlords collect all the output, then they have the choice how much to market and how much to keep for themselves. They market the surplus. See, laborer has already sold his labor for 100 rupees. He doesn't have any share in the output. So now the laborer, the marketers, the landlords can put any amount that they want on the market. They are not constrained. You see, this is the key question in economic theory. What is the share of labor and what is the share of the capital? So in our model, there is no constraint by the marginal product, contrary to the theory which says that the wage will be determined by the technological production of the laborer, and the capitalist will get the marginal product of capital. This is not true in our model because our details are different. We had a neoclassical function, then things would come out differently. And that's not the only thing. Many other things cannot make a difference. But in this model, the landlord is all the surplus. he can eat as much as he wants or market it outside, and he can put as much of it as he wants in the hands on the market for the laborers to buy. So what he will do is he will provide a subsistence wage, in the sense that he will put so little on the market that people can only buy as much as necessary to feed them. The price will be high, and so people, the real wage will be low. So notice that the nominal wage is disconnected with the real wage, and this is exactly one of the key concepts of Keynes, that the nominal wage bargain is conducted elsewhere. Real wage is determined by other forces, not by the bargain between the laborer and the landlord. So in this same exact market, with same everything being no different, suppose we introduce competition among the landlords, and they have to compete for the laborers. The laborers can dictate their price, as we have seen in the game. And suppose that the wage is paid in real terms. The laborer says, nonsense, I will not accept money, I will accept a share of the output. Then in this market structure, the landlords will get subsistence rent, because there is excess capital and limited supply of labor. So you see, by changing the market structure, by changing the rules of the game, we can get from one extreme outcome to the other extreme outcome. If you have Cobb-Douglas production function and you play by neoclassical rules, competitive markets on this side, competitive markets on the other side, everyone will get the marginal product of labor. If you have a Cobb-Douglas production function, not the fixed proportions function. So in the fixed proportion, you can't give marginal product because the total revenue is not enough to give both people the marginal product. So a fourth market structure, and this is actually what happens in reality, you have social norms which decide how much people are going to get. So if the social norm says that the sharecropper will get 50% and the landlord will get 50%, then that's how it will happen. And it has nothing to do with technology, and it has nothing to do with the economics. Everybody gets equal. Now, you can also have different types of social norms, and these also emerge, that the landlords can get 20%, in which case everyone will get equal amounts of food if you have equity. So a large number of different types of results can be produced by creating different models. So if you want to play with models, you can play all day. So the question is, we are not, this is what it means, that if you are in the Friedmanite world where you can make any model you like, then you are very flexible. Whatever observation you see, you can create a model, invent a model to match that observation. So that doesn't help very much in terms of finding out what is going on. So first thing we see is that the demand for micro foundations is legitimate, that the people, the neoclassical economists, criticized Keynes for not having micro foundations, and the post-Keynesians rejected and resisted this demand, because what they saw was that if you put neoclassical foundations underneath Keynes, then the Keynesian results will not emerge. But the point is that this doesn't mean that the demand for micro foundations is wrong. It just means that the micro foundations that they want to put are wrong. So you need to put the right micro foundation, then you can get Keynesian type results. So Keynes does not talk about what is the market structure, whether it's competitive or monopolistic or oligopolistic. He doesn't talk about technology, social norms, institutions, the classes, landlords versus laborers, sectors of the economy, agriculture versus urban, industrial. All of these things matter, and all of these things make a difference. And depending on how we specify these, we can get different meanings of effective demand, and people have gotten, at least 20 different interpretations of what is meant by effective demand in the literature, and different people have described different institutions. Some people talk about oligopolistic markets, somebody talk about information flows, anything that you choose. Stiglitz's shows that if you have information structures of certain types, then you get different results with a completely neoclassical model. So many different types of micro foundations lead to unemployment equilibria. Other types do not lead to unemployment equilibria. So the simplest one, which is quite strong these days, and Stiglitz is on this efficiency wage. This is one of them. The efficiency wage explanation says that if you pay people more than the going market rate, they will be motivated to work harder. Because if they lose a job, they can't find a new job at the same wage. And there are many other explanations of why they work harder. But anyway, once you have that, then people will, so basically if I'm paying high wages to my workers and somebody comes in and says, I will offer to work at half the wage, so you won't accept, because yes, he will work at half the wage, but he will also put in half the work. And that makes perfect sense. I mean, this is what I'm trying to say, that economics is something which relates to our experience. We can use our brains and our life to think about how economics works, not how it is taught, where it is just math, has nothing to do with reality and nothing to do with experience, and therefore it cannot be understood. So we are trying to work on economics which can be understood. So now, efficiency wage makes perfect sense but the question is this the explanation for the Great Depression? What do you think? No, this is not likely to be the explanation. People were working as hard as they can. They are trying to feed their families, save their lives. So they are not. This is not the situation. And efficiency wage is perfectly valid consideration in normal situations. But if you want to think about explaining what happened in the Great Depression, then efficiency wage is not going to do the job. And this is something we can understand just by thinking about how the economic works. So what we have to do is we have to think about what really happened. What are the internal structures of the world which drive the economy? So now we come back to the model again. You see, the reason that we need to use model is that economy is a complicated beast, and we have to consider many different things at the same time, and you cannot do that just by talking. You have to put down a model that this is happening in sector agriculture, this is happening in sector industrial sectors, this is happening with the money supply, and then put it all together and then see how it works, and this has to be done formally. It cannot be done informally. So here we have a situation where we have 10 landlords, 5 acres each, 40 laborers, and this model is deliberately chosen to have excess capacity, because that's what we saw in the Great Depression. There was excess capacity. People were so we want to create, if there's as we have already seen, if you have excess laborers, then unemployment is no problem to explain. I mean, if the capacity of the economy is not sufficient to accommodate all the laborers, then they will not find work regardless of how you structure the economy. So the problem to explain unemployment is when you have the land which is available for them to work, then why are they unemployed? And when they can produce on that land enough output to feed them and to give profit to the laborer, then it's an even bigger puzzle why they are unemployed, because it's a win-win solution for the landlord to hire the laborer and to do sharecropping. No money is needed. What does aggregate demand have anything to do with it? A laborer comes, you have a acre that is freely available. You say, okay, you produce, you eat 5 and you give me 5. What's to stop that from happening? That is why unemployment is a puzzle. So we have a monetary economy, that's one thing. Production takes place in time, that's another thing. You have to pay money wages, and at the time that you are paying money wages, the output is not there in the field. So this is one of the important elements of the economy, that what will happen tomorrow, nobody knows. And that's why you can't easily make this deal that I am talking about. So suppose that we work through the same conditions that we had. So money wage is given 100 rupees, 4,000 rupees are earned by laborers, 400 units of corn are produced, and some of the corn is retained as a profit by the landlords. Suppose 100 units of corn is the profits of the landlords, 300 units are on the market. The laborers have earned 4,000 rupees. Now let's think about the situation which Keynes was trying to have. Okay, initially, if the laborers are not saving anything, one period static equilibrium, they will spend 4,000 on 300 units of corn, and that leads to 13.33 rupees being the price of corn, and all of the corn is sold and all of the money is used. But now suppose that laborers want to save, and suppose they save 1,000 rupees. So now at 13.33 there will be a shortfall in demand. But why should prices stay at 13.33? Suppose that we allow them to adjust. Suppose we allow price. Okay, so we see that if the prices are fixed, then there will be a disequilibrium in the market for corn. All of it will not get sold. So that's one possibility. But the other possibility is that prices are flexible, and so then the price will come down to exactly 10 rupees. We have 3,000 rupees and 300 units, and then there is no disequilibrium. All of the corn gets sold, and the laborers save, and everything is fine. So from an immediate understanding, savings by laborers does not reduce aggregate demand in the way that actually some of the post-Keynesians say that a penny saved is a penny lost to demand. And so Paul Davidson, the book that I was planning to use, makes exactly this argument in the first chapter, which I couldn't understand, so I stopped. I didn't assign this book. So that argument depends on fixed prices. So if prices are fixed, then the argument is valid. But if the prices are flexible, then the argument is not valid. And if we look at the data, so again, this is now trying to be realistic. Okay, are prices fixed or flexible? It's not my choice. According to the Friedman methodology, I can choose the assumption which matches what we saw. So I can say, okay, prices are fixed because we saw shortages. Well, I'm not sure about that. We saw unemployment anyway. But realistically, if you look at the data, you will see that the prices went down. We saw last time that the prices and wages were both declining. So flexibility of prices is not really issue. So then that's not a way to solve the problem, not a way to explain unemployment. So if there was shortfall in demand, then next period landlords might want to produce less. But if all of the corn is sold, then that's no longer a reasonable explanation. But there is a disequilibrium situation here, and the disequilibrium is that the landlords are making money loss. They spent 4,000 in wages, and the profits they get from the sale of corn is 3,000. They lost 1,000 rupees on the production process. Now you can say that they also ate 100 units of corn, so that is a compensation, but this is a bit tricky. Anyway, the thing is that they are making money losses, and this is not a sustainable situation. In an economy, you should have money in equals money cannot be created or destroyed. So this is a very important thing that will actually lead us to the modern monetary theory, to which I am planning to shift soon. So that textbook is very good, which was used last semester, and we will shift to that. But I think that after going through this history of ideas, you will understand why MMT is a solution to many problems that the world has been looking for a long time, for 70 years. But without that, you would just read another theory and you would not understand why we have come to this after trying many, many different ways. So there is a disequilibrium problem. Landlords are making money loss. Keep that in mind. We will come back to this. So what are the lessons that we learned from this analysis? We find that in one period static model, shortfall in aggregate demand can only come from fixed prices. It cannot come from flexible prices. Whatever money, Say's law holds, in the sense that you have some money, you have some goods, they have to be traded with each other. Now, in our model, we have something different in that we are actually allowing the landlords to take some surplus out, which is not part of the Say's law. But still, the Say's law keeps working. Now, if you go to a dynamic multi-period model, and we will do that, you will see that this is no longer true. But then you really have to make a more sophisticated analysis. And Keynes did not do that. Keynes kept working with the static period model. So he was making assumptions about what happens without what happens in the future, what happened in the past. Basically, you see, one crucial thing which is missing from most post-Keynesian analysis that I have seen is that, okay, I'm making savings, because Keynes did stress that was an important thing. So current savings are going into the future period. Then past savings are coming into the present period. So as soon as you're doing savings, you must take into account what happened in the last period. Even if you're doing one period analysis, for the sake of consistency, you have to say, okay, current savings are going to the next period, past savings are coming into this period. If you don't take that variable into consideration, then your analysis will be wrong, and that's basically what has happened in a lot of the post-Keynesian models that I have seen. So once you realize that, then the savings issue doesn't come out in the same light, that it doesn't lower the aggregate demand, but it does cause money losses to the landlords, and that is something that we do need to worry about, and we will do that later. But whatever it is, the point is that the mechanism which creates unemployment is not the same as what Keynes is saying and what post-Keynesians are saying. So, in any genuine model, we must specify the technology, whether it's Cobb-Douglas, increasing returns, decreasing returns, Leontief. All of these things matter. The market structure, whether it's oligopoly, monopoly, perfect competition. Information structure matters. Who knows what, at what time, what happens first, what happens next. In the beginning, do we know what's going to happen in the future? So if there's uncertainty about crop production, all of these things will make a difference about the sequencing of decisions, who decides first, whether the landlords are in possession of the corn and they decide, or whether the landlords rent their land to laborers and then they produce the corn and they are the owners and they decide. All of these things make a difference. What is the relative bargaining power? Are the laborers weak? There are no unions. They negotiate individually. Landlords are powerful. They have the legal structure and power and authority. These things matter. Then, a very important factor which is not considered in economics is what happens when there is a disequilibrium. If the market is not balanced, if there's unemployment, then what do people do when there is disequilibrium? Now, the standard supply and demand theory is that the laborer will go and offer his wage at a lower price to the landlord. This theory is wrong. So then we have to come up with some better theory. And the point is that there are many kinds of disequilibrium. Like the disequilibrium we have seen is that the landlords are making losses, money losses. So what will they do in this situation? This is something that we need to take into account in order to answer what happens. We will see that the class structure matters very much. Are the landlords behave in the same way as the laborers? Actually, we will see that the consumption functions are by definition different, because the landlords don't have, in this model that we are looking at, landlords don't have income as such. They just decide, this is how much corns I want. They don't have any savings as such, because the money, actually they're making losses. The laborers get money income and they make money decisions, so they can have a consumption function, but the landlords cannot. Even if you make different types of models, and we will make different types of models, where landlords also have money and they make profits, still the consumption decision for the landlord is very different from the consumption, and the effects on the economy are very different. So you can't have one big aggregated consumer behavior for all, whether it's landlord or laborer. You have to differentiate by sectors, by classes. And you see, one of the things that is clear from this analysis, this relates to the money loss being made by the landlord, is that if you're going to balance the model, somehow you have to put in some another sector into the model. If they have this extra corn and they're making losses, the only way for them to balance their budget is to take that corn and sell it to somebody else. So money has to come in from some other party in order. So even though Keynes did not make a multi-sectoral model, there has to be another sector to balance the budget here. So that's a crucial insight, that we need a multi-sectoral model, and this is one of the start points of your modern monetary theory, that you need a multi-sectoral model. You can't do things in one sector. One very important insight is that, think of this, okay, suppose that, for example, we have agriculture sector. I'm modeling the agriculture sector. There's an industrial sector. So I can save the problem of negative profits by selling my surplus corn to the industry, and they will buy and they will put in money. But think of the industrial sector. What's happening there? They have exactly the same type of economy. So if they spend money into the agriculture sector, then they will be in deficit. The amount of money, you see, money can't be created or destroyed. So the money that is being used in the industrial sector, it will amount to zero profits for the industrialists at best, just like you're getting zero. So if the agriculture sector makes profits from the industrial sector, then the industrialists will make losses. So the only way to solve this problem is to have a government which injects money into the economy. So one of the key, crucial, central insights of modern monetary theory, which is not understood by economists, is that the deficit of the government is the surplus of the private sector, which means that the government has to run deficits in order to allow the private sector to function. The biggest economists in the land today are debating about the deficit of Pakistan, and they don't understand this basic point, that deficit by itself is not something which one worries about. Everybody thinks, and this is actually, people think about household budgets, that in my household, if I run a deficit, I can't manage it. So I must balance my budget. But the government is not a household. The government gets to print money. And how much money they should print? They should print money that is required for running the economy. If the government says, no, I'm going to balance my budget and keep the deficit at zero, then all of the private sector will make losses. So the deficit is essential. Now the question becomes, how do we manage the deficit? What are the harmful effects? All of these are good questions to ask. But the idea that we must balance budgets, this is completely ridiculous. And the sad thing is that your best economists at this time, they are writing columns in newspapers about how the government is running a deficit, because this is what economics teaches today. So multiple sectors are needed. The government sector is needed to inject money, otherwise no one can make any profits. And if the system is driven by profits, now that's the thing, that it's possible. If you have a command economy, you don't need profits. You can say that, okay, everybody has to do this and by command, and then profits are not the drivers of the system. But if you want to make profits the driver, then somebody has to inject money, because if the people have all the money, they will. If the landlords are producing with money, then that's all the money that they can get back. They cannot get back more money. It will not appear magically. So, multi-sector economy is necessary. Then multi-classes are also necessary. The producers, the laborers, the agriculturalists, they all have different types of constraints and different types of savings, and we just have to consider everybody separately in order to get a realistic model. So, can we get a shortfall in aggregate demand from savings? This was the insight of Keynes, and this insight is not invalid, but the mechanism doesn't work in the way that he suggested and in the way that the post-Keynesians write. This point I've already made, that if you have normal savings, there is an equilibrium level of savings. So the savings you are making in T will go into T plus 1, and the normal savings will again go. So that basically cancels. The savings coming in from T minus 1 cancels with the savings going on to T plus 1. So that's not going to have any effect. You can just ignore savings. So if you have abnormal savings, then you can have an effect, and we will see that it does. But the driver of the economy is not the savings, it's the expectations of the producers. And this actually Keynes does mention, that basically how much I plant today depends on what I expect to be able to sell tomorrow. This expectation, he says, is not anchored by reality, but that's also not quite true. Producers will produce less if they don't expect to sell. They don't expect to sell if they think there will be no demand for their product. So, when will there be no demand? Now, instead of imagining scenarios, let's think look at the real world to find out why producers who were walking around in the Great Depression, why they didn't start their factories, and why they thought that if we start our factories, then there will be no buyers for our goods. So this can be explained. Suppose that we have misery all around, crops have failed, laborers are in debt, they have borrowed money to survive. So now if I produce corn, I am looking at the economy. Who will buy my corn? So if I produce a lot of corn, I may have to throw it away. We have seen that nobody has money to buy, and so there is excess of stock and it's rotting because you can't sell it. The price of taking it to the market is more than you can get from selling it. Nobody has money to buy it. So when you see such a situation, then you will say that, okay, I will not produce corn. And this will lead to unemployment. If you employ people, you pay them wages, instead of saving that money which would come into the aggregate demand, they will use it to pay off debts. So again, that money will not contribute to the aggregate demand. So this is a crucial insight, that the excess savings, if everybody is in debt, then the money that is going into the economy will be used to pay off the debt. It will not be contributing to the aggregate demand. So the insight of Keynes, the effective demand issue, is that I hire labor, I pay him money, that money is available to buy the corn, so it should be at least done. But even that money is not available when you are at where you have depleted your savings. That's also a possibility, that people have a normal level of savings, which is a cushion which they want to use for their future risks. So now they have used up all their savings. They haven't any debt. So now what they want to do with money is they want to build up their savings stack back to the normal level. So they will scringe and they will not use all of their income to buy. Again, that will cause, so not normal savings, but abnormal savings can lead to loss in aggregate demand. So, somewhat more so this is basically an idea about how there could be a shortfall in aggregate demand, and the point is that at this point the government must inject money into the economy in order to allow things to happen. This is basically what Keynes said. So even though he came up with the wrong diagnosis, he came up with the right cure, that the government has to do something. The free market will not fix this problem by itself. So how does the government inject money? It has to give money to the landlords to enable them to hire if they have been wiped out. It has to give some money to the laborers to enable them to have surplus to sort of pay off their debts and to be able to participate in the aggregate demand. So basically, if the government pumps in enough money into the economy, then problem will resolve. Right? That's what Keynes thought anyway. So suppose that some event wipes out the values of assets, and this is what happened in the great financial crisis. People had houses which were worth lots of money, and they had money lying in equity in the houses. The house is worth $100,000, you put in $20,000 as deposit, so now you have savings $20,000 and you have equity in the house, which is a large amount, and suddenly the housing price collapses. Now the loan that you have on the house is more than the value of the house. Your savings which you had put in as a deposit are wiped out, they are gone, and so now you have nothing. So now as you earn income, you will use it to pay off the debts that you have, and so this kind of thing, the liquidity that will rebuild savings, and then it will go into aggregate demand. So now you have a big barrier. So now this is exactly what Atif Mian and Amir Sufi say, that after the household assets were wiped out, then the aggregate demand collapsed, because now any liquidity that is coming into the household sector will be used to rebuild savings that will not go towards the aggregate demand. So now I'm going to go over an article by Fisher Irving, which was written in 1933, which is called The Debt-Deflation Theory of Great Depressions. So he picked up on this crucial element. Keynes got some of the ideas, Fisher got some of the other ideas. His article is not right either, but it picks up something which Keynes missed. And actually Keynes knew about it, and he ignored this. He said that this is not an important part of the model. So I'm just going to go through Fisher article itself as it is, because we want to see the process that, there's Fisher in 1933, Keynes in 1930, both are trying to understand what happened. There's this huge catastrophe that has happened. What happened? So they are both reworking their economic theory, trying to understand, and these are the insights that they came up with, and they made mistakes because the event has just happened, nobody really understands it, and now they're trying to work. And this is how we work. We try to understand things, we come up with some hypothesis, some part of it is right, some part of it is wrong, then we check, and then we modify the parts that are wrong, and we go with the parts. This is how science works. But this will only work if we are working with models which are real. If we have fake models like you do in economic theory, then there is no possibility of progress, because you can make any kind of adjustment you like to match any kind of result that you see, and then there is no learning is possible about the real world. So the article says that I'm going to list 40 insights or 30 insights that I've had, and this is just things that I believe. He says this is my creed. So basically he says, he says this is not my belief in the sense that there is no evidence for it. There is a lot of evidence, but I'm just trying to come up with some ideas, and this is what I think are the most plausible ideas about the event that we saw. So I'm going to list not all the 40 ideas, but the main ones. So the first thing he says that the economic system is very complex. Equilibrium depends on a large number of different factors. So it's unlikely that we will actually be at equilibrium. There are so many different things that are working together at the same time. So the result of that, the consequence of realizing that we are not in equilibrium at all times, is that we have to study both equilibria and disequilibria. And equilibria can be stable or unstable, or on this graph you don't see a locally stable equilibrium. This A is a very stable equilibrium, so it takes a lot of effort to knock you out of this equilibrium. B is a completely unstable equilibrium. C and P are sort of in the middle. They are not really equilibrium. Any shock can move you away, but it doesn't move you away by a catastrophic amount. And then you can have locally stable, where you are at the bottom of a valley, but the valley is very shallow. So a small shock it can withstand, but a big shock will put you out. And this is actually the correct description of the economy, which Fisher comes up with later, that economy is locally stable. A small shock and economy will recover from it, but a big shock and the economy will go into some other state which is not. So all of these things we need to know in order to be able to understand. Now, economic theory, if you look at Varian, he starts in chapter 1 by saying that our job, economists, we only study equilibria, we never study disequilibria. So basically that means we only study imaginary worlds, we don't study the real world. So how should we study disequilibria? Again, this is Fisher talking. He says we have to use two things. We have to use theories. Theories tell us about what are the forces which act on a world. See, this is what I've been telling you from the beginning, that experience by itself, looking at the world, doesn't teach you anything. You have to look at the world with some theories in hand. Okay, here is the configuration of forces, but how are people going to act? What are the forces which are acting on the situation? These are not visible. These have to be, that's why you have to think about, okay, so people are in disequilibrium, landlords are making losses, now what will they do? Now, this is not something that you can see because the intentions, the motivations are not there. So, one way to see it is to look at, think about how we would act, and think about our experience in the world. So, the theories are devised by experience, and the experience is interpreted by using theories. So, these two go together. You can't, either one by itself is not useful. So, you have to work on both ends at the same time. So, this is what Fisher says, that experience, you look at the actual historical experience, the theories tell you about the forces which are acting on that, or at least they give you guesses. So equilibrium is also a force. If there is an equilibrium, there is a Nash equilibrium, there is some force which is going to push you towards that Nash equilibrium, but there may be other forces which are keeping you away from it. So equilibrium is not something you can throw in the garbage, but it is also not something you can impose without thinking. So Fisher says that the business cycle is a myth because there are multiple forces. There are many cycles. There is the inventory cycle, there is investment cycle, consumers go through cycles, stock market. So there are all of these cycles which are acting, and there is a very complex system of forces which is acting. Some of the forces are acting together, some of them are acting in opposition. So he says that if we look at the tendencies which are acting on the economic system, there are of three types, and some of these tendencies are cyclical and some of them are non-cyclical. So for example, growth is a non-cyclical tendency. The system has a tendency to grow. That's just one direction, up and up. It doesn't go in cycles. But there are random fluctuations. Some things go up, some things go down. So when you're looking at agriculture sector, it can produce a bumper crop, which is a positive shock, or it can have a crop failure, which is a negative shock. So these are random fluctuations which happen around the equilibrium level. And there are some systematic cyclical factors which we will study later. These are also acting on the economy. And of these cyclical, some are stable type, where the cycles are going to be damped. If you try to push the cycle to go out of equilibrium, the cycle will push back and try to move towards equilibrium. That's a stable equilibrium. And there are other types of cycle which are unstable. If you try to push the cycle, it will go into orbit instead of coming back to the earth. So all of these forces are acting at the same time on the economy. So the disequilibrium analysis is essential because we are never at equilibrium. So you see, it gives the example of a boat. If you have a boat in the water and it's rocking from side to side, it has a tendency to stabilize. But if it tips over too much, then it will capsize and sink. So that is a catastrophic change. So the system itself changes. So that's a locally stable system, which is not globally stable. So he says some of the things which systematically deviate from equilibrium. There is an equilibrium value, but capital stocks will normally not be at equilibrium because it takes time to build them up. So, and meanwhile, the economy keeps changing. So there is no reason to expect that your capital stocks are at the equilibrium value. The real income, again, because it's determined by factors which are outside the control, I can negotiate for my nominal income, but I cannot negotiate for the real income. So it could be easily not what I planned for it. Similarly, the prices are also controlled by factors which are not always able to adjust to the equilibrium. So what this means is that Say's law is regularly violated. The production of goods, this is Fisher now, he is also talking about Say's law. He says that the stock of goods that has been produced, this can be in excess, or the flow of goods, that is how much we are producing on a daily basis, this can also be in excess. There is a flow of demand for goods and there is a flow of production. These are governed by different sources. So ultimately, in the long run, if the flow of production is in excess of the flow of demand, then people will notice, inventories will build up and some adjustment will take place. But this is not a time-to-time instantaneous equilibrium. So this insight of Fisher, which he came to by looking at the world, was systematically rejected by Lucas and Sargent in their books, and they said that no, the economy is in equilibrium at every moment of time. So this is what the Chicago school said. So this makes a lot of sense. That you will. There are two processes which are running separately. So how can they be in equilibrium automatically? They are not tied to each other. So then you have to study what happens in this temporary disequilibrium. How do the forces act? So suppose that there's overproduction going on. Overproduction in the sense only that the increasing demand rate, the demand is increasing but at a lower rate, and the growth production is increasing at a higher rate. So there is an imbalance. So the first impact will come on business inventories. This is just what experience says. The shoes are piling up, the consumer are less, the inventories will increase. This is what happens. This is what happens in reality. If you have a fish market, it doesn't happen like that. In a fish market, the impact will be on prices because you got to get rid of them. Or if you don't want to lower prices for various reasons, then you throw away the fish. There are no inventories. But in general, but what he says is that these disequilibrium are not the cause of the Great Depression. It was not the malfunctioning of Say's law which led to the Great Depression. Again, now he's talking about his intuitions, hunches. He's seen the system work. He says, yes, this sets some imbalance, but this imbalance is not the cause. Just like our intuition says that efficiency wage is not the cause of the problems in the labor market for the Great Depression, even though it's a perfectly valid thing. So here, the imbalance between supply and demand of goods is definitely there, but this is not the cause of the Great Depression. He says that the biggest cause is that there is too little money which is being mistaken for an excess of goods. And too little money, he says that the prices are too high. So when price is high, then the real stock of money is less. And so the real money available is too little, and there is too many goods. And that is mistaken. So actually there is not enough money to buy the goods. But it's not that there is an excess of goods. I think that this is probably a mistake on part of Fisher, but anyway. The shortage of money is something which many people have blamed for the Great Depression. We'll look at some of those explanations. So what are the factors that lead to the big disequilibrium that we see? So one of the things that is clear to all economists at that time in 1933 is that we are seeing disequilibrium. This idea that Chicago rejected, that there is no disequilibrium in the economy, many people said that this was only possible after the people who had lived through the Great Depression died out. So in the 70s, you can talk about the theory that there is no disequilibrium, because prior to that, people are alive who experience disequilibrium, so they will just reject those theories, and it actually happened. Hayek, who got a Nobel Prize in the 80s, he was hounded out of the profession because he held these things. I mean, he could never hold a respectable job in an economics department, even though he's one of the big names in Chicago theory, because at that time everybody thought his theories were ridiculous. But after the memories of the Great Depression faded from the people's minds, then they could start talking and doing ridiculous theories once again, which were in control before the Great Depression. So Fisher goes through many common factors which other people are talking about. Everybody is talking about why there is Great Depression in 1933. So people have listened. He said, no, this can't be, this can't be, this can't be. At that time, efficiency was not on the list of the causes of the people because it just didn't seem plausible. So what he says is that those common factors are not responsible. Say's law is not the problem. He says the problem is over-indebtedness. People were in big debt, and this led to a collapse of prices. And so these are the two big bad actors in his understanding. One is that people are in heavy debt. So people in heavy debt, they cannot go and buy things. Because they cannot buy things, demand has collapsed. So because of the collapse of aggregate demand, prices, you can't ask large prices for goods. So prices go down. And that is deflation. Inflation is prices go up, deflation is prices go down. So he said these are the two pillars on which the Great Depression rests. One is that there is heavy debt, and the other is that this leads to deflation of prices. And these two factors reinforce each other. One causes the other, and the other causes the first. So like unstable disequilibrium, these two lead the economy to spiral out of equilibrium instead of coming back. And so the harm is being caused by the underlying debt. Also we saw that even in the Keynesian effective demand model, one has to have debt in order to make sense of the Keynesian story, even though Keynes does not himself mention that. So, oops. All right. There is a Fisher mechanism which I had, and I can download again, but not enough time, so I won't do that. So Fisher lists a sequence of things which happened. And so he says that the first thing that happens is that in 1929, the household debt was the greatest ever seen in the history of man. So why that happened we will discuss later on, but basically as a fact, it is true that the debt levels were at the highest historical values, and the same is true before the global financial crisis, that the debt levels were at historical highs. Now, very interestingly, economic theory, debt is not one of your variables. You have C plus I plus G, Allah Bala, but no debt. Why? Because the economists say that if somebody is holding debt, then somebody is holding credit, so these two things balance. So in the aggregate, there is so the modern monetary theorists say this is not true, because you have to break it down by sector. One sector is in debt, one sector is in surplus, they will act differently. If you aggregate everything, which is what happens, and then you can't, then the debt cancels the surplus and you have zero, so debt doesn't matter. So if you that's why it's important to do sectoral analysis. So what happened as a result of excess debt? People wanted to sell assets in order to pay off their debt. And they want to return loans. The biggest owner of debt is bank. So now these two things both cause shrinkage of the money supply. If you return bank loans, then we haven't discussed this until now, but we will discuss this later. When the bank gives you a loan, what most people don't know and what your economic theory doesn't teach is that the bank creates an account for you and fills it with air. It doesn't put any money in it. It just makes an entry in the books saying that Mr. So-and-so has credit of 10 lakh rupees in such and such bank. Nothing is actually taken out from other depositors. What most people think, the misconception that is given in the textbooks, is that the bank takes money from other depositors and puts it into the account of the person which is being given a loan to. But this is false. Everybody who has an account, the money in their account remains exactly the same before the loan and exactly the same after the loan. No money is taken from anybody's account and put into this new account. Just this new money, which did not exist before the loan, comes into existence. Money is created by banks. And so, when the loan is paid back, this money is extinguished. It disappears. So the stock of money goes down when the bank loan is repaid. So that's one thing. And the other thing that happens is that you have these assets and you're trying to sell them off, like happened in the global financial crisis. Everybody is trying to sell houses. So what happens? The price of the asset collapses. That's happened. The price of the housing market collapses, and now this asset isn't worth anything. Even now, the banks are holding a huge stock of houses in their books, because they know that if they go out to sell them, then they will the value of houses will collapse. And this is one of the things that the U theory of balance sheet depression takes into account. You see, the bank has to do something which is called mark to market. If you want to assess the value of a bank, you look at its assets and you look at the market value. So if the market value is very low, then those assets are worth nothing. So as long as the bank is holding the assets, suppose all the banks are holding lots of houses and the housing value is 100,000. Suppose all of the banks release the houses and try to sell them. Banks are not in housing business after all. Then the housing value would collapse and the value of their assets would be zero, and their net worth would go into negative numbers. So instead of that, it's better to just hold on to this asset, and that's what the banks are doing. So despite this, there was enough selling by private parties that the asset prices did collapse. So what happens when the price goes down? Then the value of money increases and this reduces the wages that you can pay and the jobs, the wages you can get, because the production is not profitable. The producers are making losses on their production, so they don't want to hire people, so you can't get jobs. So the wage being paid to the laborers is reduced. So the net result is that the attempt by the laborers to pay off their debts increases their debt, and this is the basic debt deflation paradox. So I already explained this issue of mark to market, that the market value of assets declines, the net worth of businesses becomes negative, mortgages go underwater. Today, I think I saw the statistics that between 1/3 to 1/2 of the mortgages in the USA are underwater. What does it mean to be underwater? It means that people take a loan from the bank. Suppose the house is worth 150,000, so you put in a deposit of 50,000 as your down payment, and you take a loan from the bank of 100,000. Now suppose that the value of the house goes to 75,000. Now all of your savings has been wiped out, $50,000 gone, and you are in loan for 25,000. Your asset is worth 75,000. You have a loan of 100,000. So this is called an underwater mortgage. Now it's in this situation, you can just walk away from the house, hopefully, and then you say, okay, I don't want to pay this loan. You just take the house, which is the security. But there are many reasons why people don't do that. Some people do, but some people don't. And some people, for anyway, it's a very difficult thing that you have to pay off the loan of 75,000 when you have to pay 75,000 to buy an asset which is worth 50,000 basically. So we pay 100,000 to buy an asset which is 75,000. So businesses collapse, confidence collapses, expectations about the future become negative in this kind of debt deflation situation. According to the Fisher, basically the main culprit, the main guilty party is the fall in prices. If we could stop the prices from falling, then the same sequence of events would lead to a stable outcome. It would go back to equilibrium. So basically he says that small shocks lead to business cycles, big shocks lead to collapse, and here a big shock to the prices just throws the system completely out of kilter, and then the ship sinks instead of going back to equilibrium. So Fisher talks about over-indebtedness. What does this mean? He says that basically this kind of thing happens when your level of indebtedness is beyond the equilibrium level. So he says that there is no easy way to define what it means that your debt level is higher than equilibrium, because there are lots of factors which determine this, and not all of them are quantitative and numerical. It depends on confidence. So if people are feeling shaky, then they will call in their loans, that you bring it in, I want the cash now, I am not sure what will happen tomorrow. And if you are confident about the future, then if somebody is a little bit late, say, okay, you can pay off next month. This makes a difference, because actually in the global financial crisis, it happened that households were only a little bit short, and they were willing to, and they wanted to negotiate with the business that, look, you give us a little bit of leeway, and we want to pay off the loan, and we will pay it. Just give us a little bit of time, because currently, so the banks did not accept this. If you are $1 short, they will say, okay, we are going to foreclose on the house, and we are just going to take it away, and you go. So this all depends on business confidence, the measure of the size of loans relative to assets. Again, the so debts in 1929 were at historically highest known levels. By 1933, the debts were reduced by 20%. People were trying to pay them off, but the prices decreased by 55%. So the value of the dollar increased by 75%, and the real debt increased by 40%. So as you pay off the debt, you go deeper into debt. This is what calculations what Fisher is showing. So what is the solution that the Fisher suggests? He says that what we need is to get rid of this deflation. If we fix the prices, prevent them from going down, or we put the prices back up, don't allow the natural remedy. He says that, and Fisher was one of the great believers in free markets. So he said that, well, naturally things will work out. You let this thing go, and that's what Hayek was saying, and that's what the Chicago School was saying, that just let the market procedure work. Yes, everybody will thrown out of work, but slowly the market will pick up. It will start, once you are at zero level, then there's no way to go but up. People will start building up, and slowly it will go back to equilibrium. And maybe it will, maybe it won't, who knows. But basically we need to shortcut the process. Fisher says, even though he is a very much a neoclassical economist, he can't say we can't wait another 10 years for the market to work. We can do things, intervene in the market and get better. So basically in 1933 almost everybody was pro-intervention, but there were a few exceptions. Hayek was still a free marketeer, so that's why basically he was discarded. Nobody, and he went into decline. So now the question is, so this is the end of the paper, Fisher. Will this work? Would Fisher's remedy have worked? Would, if we just put fixed law, that okay, this is the minimum wage, nobody can pay below this, and this is the price. He says the price level, prices will not go down either. So would that have solved the problem of deflation, which is what Fisher thought? What? The government can legislate, just like the government can legislate a minimum wage. In fact, in the oil shock in 1970s, the government, Nixon government, put down. The problem was inflation, and the people said, okay, we just force the prices not to go up. We just say that you cannot raise prices by more than so much percent by law. So that's, here you can say that you cannot lower prices of goods. I am talking only about the Great Depression. Would it have worked in 1933? Correct. This would not have worked. This remedy would not have worked, because even if you fix the prices, so basically you see, this is part remedy, and basically you are saying that okay, no asset price collapse. We will not allow the house price to go down. This is what would have happened. So whatever the level of house prices, that's going to remain the same. Then the people, what Fisher is thinking is that okay, so now the assets prices are stable, so people have wealth, they will be able to buy goods. That was his reasoning. But it won't work like that, because actually even though the asset prices will be fixed, they cannot be sold, so it's an imaginary asset, and the savings has been wiped out, Your deposit is still wiped out. Your well, actually, no, deposit would be there. So it would be a partial solution, but it requires, actually, to answer this question, we need to again make micro details. We can make a guess at what might happen based on intuition, but that's exactly what the intuition will lead us to different ideas. And by arguing in one way, we can make one thing seem plausible. By arguing in another way, we can make another thing seem plausible. The only way to settle is to put down a concrete model, make everything precise, and then see how it works in a fixed model. And then if that model is plausible, then that will give us understanding. So my guess is that it will not work. All right, so now that is Fisher's view. I want to get to, this is one book summarized on one page. So, end of Fisher. Now we consider Friedman and Schwartz. They have written a book which is a very important book called A Monetary History of the United States. They wrote this in the 1960s, and basically this book was extremely influential up till 1960s, until the publication of the book. Everybody 100% agreed, except for some nuts like Hayek, who were put out of the economics profession at that time and were considered as nuts by everybody. Everybody agreed that there was a market failure, that the intervention is required by the government in order to solve the problem of the Great Depression. Everybody from every school of thought. So somebody, even Friedman, said that we are all Keynesians now in early 60. So, but in this book, they came up with an alternative way to blame the government for all the things, all the problems, and say that it was not a failure of the free market. So basically, he provides a history in which in the spring of 1928, before the Great Depression, the Federal Reserve tightens the monetary policy, which resulted in rising interest rate, and continued this policy until it led to the stock market crash. And then when the stock market crash occurred, then this created... the sequence is wrong. First, the tight monetary policy choked off the aggregate demand, created the recession, and then the recession led to the stock market crash, which is the opposite of what most people think, that the stock market crash led to the recession. So he says that, no, first the recession occurred, and that led to the stock market crash. Now, when the stock market crashed, there was one of the effects was that the dollar became cheap, because the value of the dollar is tied to the strength of the domestic economy if the domestic economy is doing badly. So now there were some speculative attacks on the dollar. People thought that the dollar would, it can go either way. But people started purchasing dollars from foreign accounts. So in order to maintain and this was driving down the value of the dollar, so what the Federal Reserve did was it increased the interest rates, like what happened at the monetary policy decision. It increased the interest rates to protect the value of the dollar. But increasing the interest rate caused further harm to the domestic economy. So in 1932, it lowered interest rates, and that had a stimulating effect on the economy, but then interest rates were raised again, which led to another recession. So basically, all of the problems were due to the Federal Reserve. it was the government interference in the economy which caused all the Great Depression and caused failure to recovery. If the government had not interfered with the free market forces, then there would have been no Great Depression, or even if there had been, recovery would have been very fast. And so market is not to blame. This is the free market idea. So that was in 1960s. Since then, a lot of counter arguments have been made, and a lot of counter arguments have been made. So this is a long debate which continues today. It is not ended by any means. So I just want to explain to you the key counter argument to Keynes, and that is endogenous money. The idea that the central bank controls the money supply, this idea is wrong. Commercial banks create money when they make loans and delete money when the loans are repaid. This is a quote from there is a book, there is a Iceland produced document about the global financial crisis, and this is a quote from that book, that the central bank must provide banks with reserves as needed. So this is by law. So when the banks were producing money like mad, which would lead to a crisis, the bank wanted to tighten the monetary supply but could not, because it is if the private banks want to create extra money, the central bank cannot prevent them. Similarly, if the bank wants to expand money supply, it cannot do so. This is what they tried to do in the post-crisis, using the so-called quantitative easing. The government made huge amounts of money available to the banks in the expectation that this would increase the money supply, because the banks would take this money and would lend it as credit, creating money. But that also did not happen. So it is neither true that the bank can restrict the money supply, nor is it true that the bank can expand the money supply. And for that reason, the idea of Friedman that the government is to blame cannot be sustained. And so, going a little bit further, the key idea of Hyman Minsky, which we will be studying later, is that the reason for the business cycle is that first we have understood that the private sector creates money at will, independently of any desire of the central bank. Now, the second thing which is true is that the private banks create money pro-cyclically. So if the economy is expanding, the private credit is also expanding, because at that point you can get profits by making loans. And actually, according to theory, the money creation should be counter-cyclical. If the economy is expanding, it is overheating, and you want to restrict the money supply in order to prevent the aggregate demand from increasing beyond the level of sustainability. You want to cut down on inflation. And if the economy is going into a slump, then you want to expand the money supply. But the private sector, when the economy goes into slump, it stops lending. So the money creation process also tightens up. So there may be an original small business cycle, and this pro-cyclical credit creation by the private sector makes it even worse. So exactly the opposite of what Friedman says in this book, and the whole monetary says. It is not that the government created the cycle and made the cycle worse. It was the private sector which, there may have been a cycle due to government reasons, but it was the private sector which made it so bad that the economy collapsed. The central banks are powerless to counteract this money creation, this endogenous money. So exogenous money is when the central bank creates it. Exogenous money is when it is created by the private sectors at demand. So it is not given from the outside the system. It is part of the what the system produces. All right, so that is all for today's lecture. I think that now we are done with Keynes. I have understood for the first time that Keynes is not the way to go. So we will next lecture will be on the market for labor, because that's an important issue on which there is 70 years of confusion and no clarity. Okay, so supply and demand doesn't work. Then what is the market for labor like? For that we have a separate lecture. So from next week, Monday onwards, we will start modern monetary theory, and I will assign you the book and we will give you readings from there. So that's a very well organized, clean book. I was doing things in the while trying to understand the background to this first, because I didn't have clarity on this. But now I think that I'm pretty clear on what goes before MMT, and so now we can start MMT from next week.